December 1996. The Cold War had been over for 5 years. The Soviet Union had dissolved. Russia was weak, economically shattered, and politically fragile. And the question of what would happen to the military alliance that had faced it down for half a century, NATO, was being decided in diplomatic meetings across European capitals. In one of those meetings, the Russian Prime Minister delivered a private warning to British officials. The warning was recorded, it was filed, it was classified, and it sat in the British National Archives for nearly 30 years. It reads, "Russia could not stop NATO enlarging, but this would create a fragile situation which could explode." The same files that contain that warning also contain the private assurances that British Prime Ministers had been giving to Russian officials. Assurances about what NATO would and would not do. Assurances that were being made in private, while a different plan was being pursued in secret. Those files were published by Declassified UK in June 2025, and what they reveal is a gap between what Britain said privately, what Britain planned secretly, and what actually happened, that nobody in the British government has ever been asked to explain. My name is the voice behind Creepy Chronicles, and I want to be very clear about what this investigation does and does not claim. This is not an investigation about who started the Ukraine war. It is not an argument for or against NATO. It is not a justification of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which is a matter of international law with a clear legal verdict. This is an investigation into what British government documents, now declassified, now publicly available in the National Archives, actually say about the private diplomacy that preceded decades of NATO expansion. We present the documents. The conclusions are yours. The documents cover the period 1996 to 1997, the years when NATO's expansion into Central and Eastern Europe was being actively planned. Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic were on course to join. Russia was watching this with deep alarm. John Major, in a call with Russian Foreign Minister Primakov in February 1997, addressed those concerns directly. The declassified briefing notes from number 10 Downing Street for that call confirm the message Britain wanted to convey. The notes state, "We are not seeking to encircle Russia with NATO." In the call itself, Major told Primakov that, and these are his words as recorded in the declassified file, if he were Russian, he too would be concerned by the possibility that NATO might move up to Russia's borders. But, he added, NATO has no intention of doing this. Major also gave Yeltsin a specific assurance about military infrastructure. He told the Russian president that NATO would only deploy a modest amount of NATO infrastructure, such as storage facilities and command and control arrangements, in Eastern Europe. These were private assurances, given in the name of the British government, recorded in documents that were then classified for nearly 30 years. Tony Blair, who succeeded Major in 1997, continued the same approach. The declassified files covering Blair's early period in office show that he too gave private assurances to Kremlin officials about NATO's intentions regarding Russia's borders. The files confirm that Blair explicitly pledged to Russian officials that NATO would not move up to Russia's borders, the same pledge Major had made, the same private assurance given to the same Russian audience. Blair's foreign policy advisor at the time was a civil servant named Matthew Rycroft, the same official who would later become Blair's private secretary during the Iraq War and draft the infamous Downing Street memo confirming that the intelligence on Iraq's weapons was being fixed around the policy. The private assurances and the official policy were being managed by the same small group of officials across both the Major and Blair years. The continuity of the message and the gap between that message and what was actually being planned runs through both governments. The same archive that contains those private assurances also contains a secret British policy paper from September 1996. That paper, drawn up by Downing Street, states Britain's actual position on NATO expansion with complete clarity. It confirms that Britain was committed to enlarging NATO to the east, and it adds a qualifier that the private assurances to Russia conspicuously omit. Britain was committed to enlarging NATO to the east, the paper states, even if Russian acquiescence is not possible. In private, NATO has no intention of moving to your borders. In the secret policy paper written in the same period, we will expand regardless of what Russia thinks. The declassified files covering 1996 and 1997 are full of references by British officials to Russian concern, negative attitudes, fears, hostility, and resentment about NATO enlargement. British officials understood exactly how Russia felt. They understood what the expansion would mean to Moscow, and they pursued it anyway, while giving private assurances that softened the message in diplomatic meetings. In December 1996, Russian Prime Minister Viktor Chernomyrdin met with British officials. In that meeting, he delivered a warning that the declassified files record verbatim. Russia could not stop NATO enlarging. But this would create a fragile situation which could explode. That warning was filed, classified, and remained unseen by the public for nearly 30 years. The same files show that by August 1996, a paper drawn up by Downing Street clearly noted Russia's policy of not allowing Ukraine or the Baltic states to join NATO. Britain understood that Ukraine specifically was the red line Moscow would not accept. Ukraine was not a member of NATO in 1996. It is not a member of NATO today. But the question of its potential membership, the question that Chernomyrdin warned would create a situation that could explode, has been at the heart of the crisis that led to Russia's invasion in February 2022. I want to be precise about what these documents establish and what they do not. The documents confirm that both Major and Blair gave private assurances to Russian officials that NATO had no intention of moving to Russia's borders. Those assurances are recorded in declassified files in the National Archives. They are not disputed by the British government. The documents confirm that a secret British policy paper from September 1996 stated that Britain was committed to NATO enlargement even if Russia would not accept it. That document is also in the National Archives. The documents confirm that Russian officials explicitly warned Britain that NATO expansion would create a fragile and potentially explosive situation. That warning is also recorded. What the documents do not confirm is whether those private assurances constituted formal binding commitments under international law. They do not confirm that Britain's diplomatic language was legally equivalent to a treaty. Governments make private assurances in diplomatic meetings regularly. Not all of them are binding. Not all of them are kept. What the documents do confirm is the gap between what Britain said in those private meetings and what Britain was simultaneously planning in its internal policy papers. That gap has never been publicly explained. Creepy Chronicles investigates the cases the official record would rather you never found. Every Thursday and every Sunday, real, documented, told without apology. The declassified files do not explain the Ukraine war. They do not justify what Russia has done. They do not resolve any of the complex legal and moral questions about sovereignty, international law, and the rights of countries to choose their own alliances. But they do add something to the picture that was not visible before June 2025. They show that the diplomacy that surrounded NATO expansion was not as straightforward as the official account suggests, that private assurances were given and not kept, that warnings were received and not acted upon, and that the documents recording all of this were classified for nearly 30 years. Russia could not stop NATO enlarging, but this would create a fragile situation which could explode. That was written in December 1996. The files were opened in 2025. In between those two dates, a war.